Hello, and welcome to the Say Yes to Holiness podcast. I'm Christina Simmons, your host, and today I have a most wonderful guest who I think that you're going to truly enjoy, particularly because she's right in that, cross section in that hotbed of topics of gender identity and feminism and different things. And I think you're going to find this to be very fruitful in also the process of also providing you maybe an opportunity to be able to continue your own journey in these different topics. So without further ado, Leah Jacobson, thank you for coming on to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's a pleasure to talk with you today.
Uh, oh, not at all. So, one of the things that I love to do is be able to help people come to know about really great things that are going on out in the world, in particular the Catholic world. And this new program that you are managing, that you have kind of helped stand up, and we'll get into that about Catholics, women's, and gender studies. As I said, it really is at that cross section. But before we get into all of that, could you share with the audience just a little bit about your own journey and kind of how you came to be where you are today? Mhm.
Gosh, that's a big question.
It can be, so you can answer as big or as small as you
I
want.
know, gosh, how did I come to where I am? Well, I think I'm very blessed to have been raised in a Catholic home, kind of a cradle Catholic from the upper Midwest. I reside in the Duluth Diocese of northern Minnesota, and I grew up on a small dairy farm. And so it just surrounded from my earliest days by a very obvious natural order to creation, to life, to family, to everything. Like I think that's probably one of the biggest blessings that I've had in my life is being born where and when I was born into the family that I grew up in. So as a Midwestern farmer's daughter, I became very aware at a very young age that God doesn't make mistakes, that nature is very predictable, that there is an order to all of it, and that when we rail against it and when we think we know best, it's usually not to good consequence.
Mm,
So when I went off to college with that sort of an upbringing, having not been exposed to the things that most of my peers had been exposed to, I lived out in the country so far that we did not get cable television. This is the days prior to the internet. I didn't even see an episode of Friends or MTV until I got to college. So I was kind of sheltered in a way, but also not sheltered in that I actually understood some of the very basic realities of life, I think. So college was an interesting experience. University of Minnesota Duluth. I showed up there as a freshman in the early 2000s. I'm dating myself a little bit, and very quickly realized that issues of identity, sexuality, gender, that these were really hot topics, and that many of the women, many of my peers, had a very different relationship with their body and their sense of women's rights and autonomy than I had. I always understood bodily autonomy and women's rights to be to understanding your fertility and men respecting and working with your body, that women's bodies as they naturally existed should be the basis of sexual decision making and family planning. And I quickly found out from my roommates that that's not at all what I should be thinking. And I should be thinking, access to contraception and abortion are my supreme rights as a woman. And that never made sense to me. I never understood how women should take all of this onto ourselves and sort of excuse men from the conversation. And
mm,
it didn't make sense. It never did. And so I guess I had a feminist streak, but kind of running in the opposite direction
mhm.
of the feminist women on my campus. So these issues right away, right as I hit college as, a freshman, I knew that I was landing in my life's work pretty quickly
Mm,
because I felt so strongly about it. I just
mhm,
sensed something was really off
mhm,
with the women's movement as it was being presented to me.
mm. I can so identify with that because for me, I actually was raised Protestant. I was Presbyterian, became Catholic when I went to college, Marquette University, and it was something of where so I was raised within kind of the idea of what you're speaking about as a woman, and it wasn't until I encountered John Paul's theology of the body that I was just like, oh my gosh, here is the fullness of who I can be as a woman.
Yeah.
And I don't have to try and be a guy. I can actually be a woman, and it's the fullness of what I've been called to. And it was such a liberating, experience. And, so I love what you said about excusing men. And I think, one of the greatest, we have sons. And so I think one of the great, damages or, negatives that have happened is kind of this idea of, okay, guys, you just respect whatever, the lady wants versus no, you are to cherish, you are to protect, you are to, to help guide in accordance with what God has established. And so, yeah, I totally identify with what you're saying. So, can I jump ahead in the
Yeah.
sense of, so does this kind of lead you to what became your first book that was
Love,
released
yeah,
in
it did.
2021?
It did, so as contrary as I was, to the women's movement at that point, I really got contrary in that I married very young. So
Mhm,
I, met and fell in love with the boy I met on the first day of my freshman year of college.
mhm,
Turned out to be the love of my life. And we began having children at a pretty young age, 22 years old. We welcomed our first child. We
mhm,
had several children pretty quickly. And motherhood, like the taking over of my body, what began to happen, I was pretty well versed in all of the birds and the bees, having grown up on a dairy farm. Um, I knew how it all worked pretty clearly, but just the overwhelming, the nature of the female body and of pregnancy and fertility and breastfeeding and how it put my life into such a clear order. The
mhm,
priorities became so evident as I became a mother. My body physically was telling me what it needed to do, what I should be doing if I wanted to be healthy, if I wanted to be happy. My body was directing me. And it
mhm,
took a little bit of surrender because there was deprogramming to be done, even though I had grown up in a very nature oriented sort of atmosphere. I still lived in the world. I still went to college. I still had those expectations of, well, your career is what's going to make you happy. Your accomplishments are what are going to make you happy. And so I had to kind of deprogram that and really accept and understand that what my body was creating was greater than any accomplishment, that could be
mhm,
recognized externally. And it was a reordering that was happening in my early years of motherhood. And it was a surrender to what my body was just doing, really, that I couldn't really control. If I just stepped back and allowed it to lead, this whole new kind of rhythm of life opened up to me.
mhm,
And that did very much lead to the next step in my education. I thought, I really love what midwives are doing. I think I'm going to go back to college, become a nurse midwife, help women deliver their babies. My husband was a nurse, an advanced practice nurse. And I thought that must be how God wants to use me. And so I went to an adoration chapel 3 weeks before the semester was to begin. I had two young children at this point, and I had been accepted into a post-baccalaureate nursing program. And in the Adoration Chapel, the Holy Innocents Adoration Chapel in Duluth, Minnesota, at Our Lady Star of the Sea. And I said, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And the only time I've ever heard an audible response in prayer was in that chapel. And I heard one word, and it was simply no. And
mhm,
I paused and said, okay, Lord, if not this, then what? And he sort of just poured out a vision for women's healthcare centers, for a
mhm,
vision of holistic, integrated women's health that ended up becoming the nonprofit that I founded, which is the Guiding Star Project. And so that nonprofit is still up and running. We still are opening up women's health centers around the country that facilitate and focus on the nature of woman's natural body and really redefine healthcare as the support for our natural functions. And we really define within our nonprofit and within the work that I do that misogyny is not just hatred for women. Misogyny is the alteration and the suppression and the destruction of a
mhm,
female body. It's of her life-giving abilities. That truly is hatred of a female body. So we do everything opposed to that. We honor and support women's bodies. Uh,
mhm,
at that point, then, as I began to work in the nonprofit world and founded a nonprofit and started to really get into women's healthcare, I saw the women's healthcare field is where the majority of these lies are kind of being implanted into women's hearts under the guise of medical authority and expert. Women
mhm,
begin to feel and that they are not smart enough. They don't know how their body works. They're not smart enough to know it. They're not the expert. They sort of hand it over to medical professionals, and they lose a lot of bodily autonomy. They lose a lot of their own voice in the healthcare system. And so my focus, shifted then at that point towards getting a master's in women's health and wellness and becoming a board certified lactation consultant. I thought that's a place where women are processing their traumas shortly after birth, and I want to be there. And besides, I grew up on a dairy farm, so I knew all about it. I know all
Yeah,
about these things. Like
that's awesome.
that's the field for me, I guess.
Uh, so in the midst of doing all of this, we haven't even gotten to the project that you're now involved with, which is to help the St. Thomas, University of St. Thomas, launch this new master's program in Catholics, women's, and gender studies. So why was it that in the midst of you doing what is absolutely life-giving and wonderful work, and particularly for women, what really, how was it? I'm going to say, how was it that God called you to that and said, "Hey, this is where you need to be now"? Mhm.
Yeah, so I had an awareness, as I was doing my master's program in women's health and wellness, I had an awareness that, the medical system is where a lot of these lies are being really implanted in women's hearts, but it's also through higher education and, these
Mhm.
women's studies programs, this sort of rhetoric. It was at college that I very first heard these ideas for the first time and realized that this is a social doctrine that is being put out with credentials alongside it. You could be a women's studies major and be an expert in what women need all of a sudden. And I recognize it's not just healthcare, it's higher education, and then it's also the media. There's really a three-pronged approach from culture on women's identity and this destruction of the female body. And so when the opportunity arose, when I heard that UST was considering a program focused on gender, sexuality, they weren't really sure what it was. I kind of raised my hand and I said, can we talk about women's studies? Can we talk about the women's movement and feminism? Because the effects that it's having are so detrimental on our daughters' generations, on all of us. It's destroying our identity as women.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And in the process, and I kind of alluded to it before, in the process, we're also destroying, for our men, we're destroying their identity as well. And that just creates an implosion of, I think what we're seeing in our society now, this implosion of no one knows who they are, what they are, or, how they're supposed to go about, their lives because they're like, well, I'm not sure who I am. I need to figure that out.
Well, and I
And
love it so much coming from, University of St. Thomas in particular, being a Newman Guide school, being one of the ex Corday colleges, saying that they are in line with the magisterium of the church, it gives them a unique position to just drench this program in a Christian anthropology and worldview, the metaphysics of what is a human being in relationship to God, in relationship to one another. That is the only way that these issues can be understood correctly, is within that framework to begin with. So you have to start from that as your sturdy foundation to have a program that's going to actually tell the truth.
and I think what you just said there, I think, in my perspective, and you can correct me, but I think that's probably the most unique aspect of this program when you're looking at other women's studies, gender, studies, programs.
100%, because this is really, quite frankly, this is the first and only that I'm aware of anywhere in the world that
Mhm.
takes this exact prefix, Women in Gender Studies. WGS is a very common prefix, but this is the only program in the world that's going to base it and anchor it in a Christian anthropology of the human person.
Mhm. So that being said, someone might be going, well, what exactly is this Catholic anthropology? What would I be studying? Am I going to be studying scripture? So what might be some subjects that, people, if they were to say, yeah, I want to get a master's degree in this, what would they be studying? And then, go ahead and share a little bit of that, and then I'll follow up. Mhm.
Yeah, it is. It is, anthropology sometimes is a word that's not really well understood. We think,
Mhm.
something totally different. But it really is that identity of the human person, the body and soul integration, that reunification of the person as body and soul.
Mhm.
That's been lost in our culture. And so it is just starting there. That's really where every student starts. It's a prerequisite to this program. And then we take you through an understanding historically of how it has been severed, the dualism, the different heresies and things that we've seen in the church that have really attacked that understanding. The program is broken up uniquely into 4 certificates. 3 of these certificates, though, combined make up the master's. And then that
Oh,
4th
okay.
certificate kind of exists outside of the master's program that you could just take as a sampler. If you
Mhm.
only can come for just a small portion of it, we have a sexuality and gender certificate, which is a sampling of the following 3 certificates that I'll take you through quickly,
Mhm.
and help explain what the coursework is. The first major area of study, think of the master's program as broken up into 3 units.
Mhm.
And the first unit is Catholic feminism. And the
Mm.
second unit would be women's health and wellness. And the third is gender and family policy. And so the first one is really the deep, collection of the church's teachings on women, everything from John Paul II's letter to women and Evangelium Vitae and theology of the body to the thinking of great female saints in the church, looking at Hildegard of Bingen and Catherine of Siena and Joan of Arc and the deep intellectual tradition of the women of the church. We're going to dive in there and also look closely at the history of the women's movement and where maybe there have been moments of convergence with church teaching and social justice, and then moments where we've completely gone opposite directions. We're going to look at where are there places where we can potentially redirect and get the women's movement back on track. Is there such a thing as a Catholic feminism?
Mhm.
That's really a question we need to be pondering. The second unit, then the women's health and wellness unit, is really the body. It's focusing on what should authentic women's healthcare look like. If we want to talk about women's rights, women's health and wellness, what does a woman's body do and how can we protect that, and research on it, advances in women's healthcare, and then medical ethics concerning
Mm.
fertility, childbirth, all those things. These are very complex issues that we need to have a much greater level of comfort talking about openly as Catholics. We need to really shed a light on what's happening in the exam room to women every day.
Yeah.
Um, then that final certificate, gender and family policy, really focuses on exactly that, the effects of policy on marriage, family, gender, transgenderism, how these identity policies affect us, and are we actually doing well because of them?
Mm.
Really looking at the science and the social science of the effects of policy on human flourishing.
Mm. Wow. I had shared before we got on, that, I had done theology of the body certification and had dived deep into this. And so I'm almost salivating a little bit where I'm going, oh, there's probably some great stuff in here.
Wow.
But it's something that I think, regardless of where it is that you've experienced, particularly as a woman, where it is that you've experienced, um, you know, it, this prejudice. I mean, honestly, I mean, I can't think of it any differently. Be it, in the doctor's office, be it, with our not being able to take family leave or not being recognized that I should be able to, have what it is that I desire, to have happen to my body, and you shouldn't get to determine to me what that is. And then of course, I think holistically, one of the I think you nailed it on the head of where, the idea of Catholic feminism isn't in order to, then say, "Oh, I'm a feminist," so much as it is in order to help us reintegrate who it is that we are in our fullness, so mind, body, and soul all together,
Amen.
integrated. Yeah. So, it sounds wonderful. So one of the things I just want to bring this out. So, so you said, and I wanted to circle back to it. You said that if you wanted to just do like one of the certificates. So I'm thinking that this might be how somebody who is like really busy or whatever, and they can't do a full-on master's program, that they could like dive into it. So is
Good.
the program designed for that?
It is. So there was that first one, that sexuality and gender certificate, which is a sampling of the
Mhm.
other 3 certificates, which are much more concentrated. So the sexuality and gender is a little bit higher level. If you
Mhm.
just like, if you're maybe I would say that one probably be most appropriate for somebody like a Catholic high school administrator or somebody who sits in a position of having to be basically informed so that you can make good policy, that would be an appropriate certificate for you.
Mm,
However, if you really want to dive deep into Catholic feminism, there is just the Catholic feminism certificate, and you can just dive deep there and stay there. Just come for just that certificate, and you don't have to do the whole master's if you don't want to. Or
mm,
if maybe you're a medical provider, a nurse practitioner, a doctor, an MD, an OBGYN, a midwife, the Women's Health and Wellness certificate might be very helpful to really explore the bioethics of
mhm,
women's health practices, the advances in women's healthcare, and deep dive a little bit into how we even ended up with the standards that we currently have. Because that really is, when we start to look at it, wow, we should really be questioning women's health standards. You know, these did not come to us through sound medical advancement. There's a lot of political agenda and big money behind
mhm.
women's healthcare. And then that final gender and family policy, again, if you're somebody who's working in, you know, as a lobbyist or a policy position, this would be an important certificate for you to consider. Just those 12 credits of gender and family policy might be really great for you.
Mm. I am hearing in the midst of, who these might be good for, a few of what I'm thinking you have hopes for the future, of graduates from this program about what they might be about. Share a little bit of that because I think it's important for us to really envision what's possible when we truly have been formed properly to live out the vocation that God calls us to. Mhm.
I mean, my mark of success for a graduate from any of these certificates or this program is really that they're able to speak in the culture and wherever they're vocationally, you know, engaged, whether it be in the home as a mother, or whether it be, you know, in the boardroom as a CEO, or wherever, or maybe it's, you know, from the altar as a priest, you know, whatever the vocational aspect is that you live out in your life, that you're going to be prepared to speak charitably,
Mm,
truthfully, without fear, and invitationally, with joy, not apologizing for the church's teachings, as so many of us are tempted to do. So
mhm,
many people are tempted to take that sort of like, well, I'm sorry, but the church says this. And the reality is, no,
mhm.
please come listen. The church says this. This is incredible. It's beautiful. Human flourishing results when we align ourselves with the natural order that God put in place for the world. Because just like a kid growing up on a farm, watching, you know, the seeds be planted in the spring and the harvest in the fall, the predictability and the beauty when you get to sit back and enjoy the world as God intended it instead of fight against it always. I could plant in the fall and hope I get a harvest, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
Just align ourselves with God's plan for us. He set this up so beautifully for us, and the church is trying so hard to invite everyone back into that sort of ordered, um, that life.
Yeah. Well, and I would say for those of us who are, Catholic living out our faith, and you're going, well, where do I experience that order? It feels like my life is just kind of chaos. And it's like, that's the liturgical cycle. That
Yes.
is the life of the church that we are invited into, and the more that we do, the easier it becomes for us to see how this is out of order or that is, needs to be adjusted, so that we are in alignment fully with what God desires for us, which is a beautiful and abundant life. Jesus
He's
told
a
us that himself.
good God. He is a good God, and he wants really good things for us. And that's the beauty of what this Women and Gender Studies program is about. It's
Mhm.
not about just being victims of our bodies as women. It's about putting forward the beauty of femininity and asking culture and society to recognize it and make room for it.
Mm, absolutely beautiful. Where can people learn more about this program in particular?
Yeah, you can go to, I think this is a really easy domain name. I hope so. We chose an easy domain. It's www.catholicgenderstudies.com. So if they go to
Ah,
Catholic Gender Studies, we'll land them at the University of St. Thomas at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture. Nesty is the home for this program. And it's a good home for this. It's an evangelistic center on the campus that's focused on ecumenical dialogue. So this is not just a program for Catholic students, although it is deeply entrenched in the beauty of the church's teachings. But we welcome Christian brothers and sisters of any faith to join us.
oh, and that's awesome. So I want to pivot just a little bit before our time runs out. And I want to just kind of go back to your own journey. And what have you found to be the most challenging or rewarding about doing this work as you're trying to correct these misunderstandings that we're finding within society?
I think the most rewarding, I think I'll start there, and that acknowledges the challenge, I guess, is, being a mother to 7 children. Um, that's an interesting point, just even right there. Being the mother to 7 children automatically, in some circles, kind of disqualifies my voice. Like, you must not know anything about anything if you had 7 children. Um,
Right.
but being a mother, specifically, I have 4 sons, and teaching them a new way of viewing women has been very gratifying, but it's really my daughters.
Mm,
My oldest daughter is 16, and the most gratifying thing for me is to hear her telling her friends, about her
mhm,
fertility cycle and talking about that and teaching them that, and her friends, opening up and talking about that and seeing that they're not ashamed, that the shame is being removed from this younger generation of women has been the most gratifying. But then right alongside it is the challenge
mm,
of, she's in the public school system right now. She's going to
mhm,
public high school, and her health class gives a
mm,
completely different curriculum. So there's the challenge, but the gratification is when she comes home and tells me that she just taught her teacher all
mhm.
about the luteal phase. I'm like, I'm so excited when I hear that.
Oh, wow. You have an evangelist of your own in your
Yeah,
daughter there.
I'm very proud.
Mm. As you should be. What a grace and joy. How do you think this work has been helping you on your pilgrimage to become a saint?
Oh my goodness. It has required a lot of humility. I think
Mm,
that's the best way to say it. Well, just as I mentioned, having 7 children sometimes disqualifies me. And having the humility and the charity to um, extend charity to others always. There's a lot of assumptions that are going to be made of you, and to not respond in anger. I think
mm,
that has been the greatest invitation the Lord has given me in my own practice, towards holiness,
mhm,
is seeing the woundedness in others, and in a sense, just, forgiving it quickly, saying, I understand that this is a result of a wounded culture.
right.
So that's what I'm kind of continually being called, is into, humility. The humility prayer it's a hard one, but it's a necessary one on a frequent basis for me.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I definitely identify with that.
Yeah.
Um, has there been a particular idea or practice that has been really key for you to be able to remain faithful to God's call in your life?
Well, it maybe sounds a little hokey, but honestly, the immersion in nature for me, having grown
Mm,
up surrounded so much in nature, and I'm not like to that sense of like, well, nature is my church, like I'm
right.
spiritual. Yeah, it's not that at all. Like, I absolutely love the liturgy, and I love, the liturgical seasons and just the order of mass in the church, and I love being in the physical presence of the church building and community. But there is something incredibly grounding for me of getting into nature, hiking, sunsets,
Mhm,
seeing, gardening. I garden a lot. And something about gardening reminds me that God is continuing to show up, and he's continuing to show a lot of hope and faith in us as human beings, is that we keep growing things, we keep having babies, we keep existing. Um, and so God is still good.
mm. Uh, yeah. Again, I think we're definitely sisters, and where I have been closest with God has been in the process of being out in nature and immersing myself in it as well. So, one final thing, I wanted to ask if you could go back in time and share one piece of advice with your 18-year-old self. So before you show up on campus, what would you have told yourself?
Oh gosh, I think I would have told myself to like read all of theology of the body. Like, I kind of like dabbled in it, but I almost like just enough to be dangerous, like, just enough to probably be judgy, quite frankly. I
Right.
wish that I could have just, sat at the feet of John Paul II, in a
Mm,
sense, in his lifetime when he was still alive, to just really understand and immerse myself and understand everything that he was saying. Because as I've grown older, and it's become more of my my background. I wish I'd known some of that when I was a little younger.
Mhm. I can, yeah, my encountering theology of the body was definitely transformative for me as a woman. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's good stuff. Such
uh,
good stuff.
yeah, it definitely is. So, Leah, thank you so much. I can't believe that our time has already come and gone. Conversation that is good and enriching and is full of truth is always something. It taps into the eternal, and time flies. So, I look forward to the opportunity to be able to hear about those who go to this program and participate, whatever level, and then also in your own work, continuing to pray for it. But for everybody who wants to go and check out this program, again, it's at www.catholicgenderstudies.com. Leah, any final words for our audience?
Uh, I just want to thank you, quite frankly, for the work that you're doing and for the listeners that you've pulled together, the people that follow this, that have a desire for holiness. I'm so happy, and it gives me so much hope that there's people that truly desire to live their life in a holy way. So thank you.
Not at all. It again, kind of like you knowing what it is that our Lord wants you to do. It's similar, and it is definitely a privilege to be able to do it. So, thank you again for being on the show, and for everyone out there. My continued prayers for each and every one of you, that you may be able to do whatever it takes, so that together we can tell the Master of Death, not today. God bless everybody.